What if the fruit growing quietly in ancient fields was never just fruit at all, but part of the way God sustained his people through famine, exile, weakness, and long seasons of need? Most people read the Bible and pass over the fruit names without a second thought. Figs, dates, pomegranates, grapes, olives, almonds, sycamore figs, carob pods, and the rest can sound like simple background details. Yet when you look closer, a different picture begins to emerge. These were not ornamental references. They were foods people reached for when they needed strength. They were gifts carried into royal courts, provisions packed for long journeys, staples stored through dry seasons, and in some cases, the exact remedy used in moments of crisis. And today, I want to walk you through 20 biblical fruits that have been treasured for centuries, not only for their place in Scripture, but for the real nutritional and medicinal compounds modern science keeps uncovering inside them. Stay with me, because some of the fruits on this list are far more powerful than most people realize. One appears in one of the Bible's most famous healing stories. Another was placed on the temple itself as a symbol of abundance. And one of the final fruits on this list was considered so dangerous in its wild form that a single mistake could turn a meal into poison. If you want ancient wisdom paired with modern research, delivered in a way that feels alive and engaging, this is where the story gets interesting. Let's step into it. 1. Figs, the fruit that could restore the weak. Few fruits appear in Scripture as often as figs. They show up as symbols of peace, prosperity, and shelter. Every man under his vine and under his fig tree became a picture of safety and stability, not just a casual agricultural detail. In ancient Israel, a fig tree meant more than shade. It meant security. It meant a household could count on something nourishing, even when the harvest was uncertain. Fresh figs were eaten in season, while dried figs were pressed into cakes that could last for months. That made them one of the most reliable fruits in the ancient world. Modern nutrition explains why figs earned that reputation. They are rich in soluble fiber, especially pectin, which feeds beneficial gut bacteria and supports smoother digestion. They also provide potassium, calcium, magnesium, and natural sugars that release energy steadily rather than in a sharp spike. Dried figs, in particular, were a concentrated source of nourishment for travelers, farmers, and the poor. Traditional use included eating them fresh, drying them for winter, and using fig cakes in both food and topical applications. The Bible's attachment to figs makes perfect sense when you realize they were one of the most practical fruits a family could have in a dry climate. They nourished, they stored well, and they helped keep people going when other resources ran thin. 2. Pomegranates, the fruit of holiness and abundance. The pomegranate was not just admired in Scripture, it was honored. Moses was instructed to place pomegranates on the hem of the high priest's robe. Solomon had bronze pomegranates placed on the temple pillars. This fruit was associated with beauty, fertility, and the fullness of life. And the symbolism matches what modern research keeps finding inside it. Pomegranates are loaded with polyphenols, including punicalagins, which are rare and powerful antioxidant compounds. These are broken down in the body into substances called urolithins, which have been studied for their role in reducing inflammation and supporting healthier cellular function. Clinical studies have also linked pomegranate juice to better blood pressure, improved arterial flexibility, and lower oxidation of LDL cholesterol. The seeds were eaten fresh, the juice was pressed, and the rind was sometimes brewed into teas or remedies for digestive complaints. In the ancient world, this fruit was prized because it looked like life bursting open in the hand. Modern science suggests there was more truth in that image than anyone realized. 3. Grapes, the fruit of covenant and connection. If one fruit carried the language of relationship in Scripture, it was the grape. The vine appears again and again as a symbol of Israel, blessing, and spiritual dependence. Jesus later used the grapevine to explain one of the most powerful images in the New Testament. I am the vine, you are the branches. That image worked because grapes were woven into daily life. They were eaten fresh, dried into raisins, crushed for juice, and fermented into wine. Every form had a place. Nutritionally, grapes contain resveratrol, quercetin, and anthocyanins, especially in the skins of dark varieties. These compounds have been studied for cardiovascular support, cellular repair, and healthy aging. Grapes also provide hydration, vitamin K, and potassium, all valuable in a hot climate where dehydration was a constant concern. Traditional use included eating fresh grapes in season, drying them into raisins for the road, and pressing the fruit into wine or juice. Grapes were not just a sweet snack. They were part of the spiritual and physical vocabulary of ancient life, which is probably why Scripture used them so often to talk about fruitfulness itself. 4. Dates, the sweetness of the wilderness and the promised land. Dates are one of the most important fruits in the biblical world. They grow on palms that thrive in harsh, dry regions, which made them essential in desert travel and settlement. In Scripture, honey is often mentioned alongside milk and land abundance, and many scholars believe date syrup may have been a major source of that sweetness. Dates were calorie-dense, easy to store, and capable of feeding people through long journeys. Their nutrition is as impressive as their history. Dates contain fiber, potassium, magnesium, copper, and a range of polyphenols that support cellular protection. Their natural sugars make them a fast source of energy, but the fiber helps slow absorption. Some modern studies also suggest that dates eaten in late pregnancy may support smoother labor. Traditional use involved eating them fresh, drying them for storage, pressing them into syrup, and carrying them as travel food. In the ancient world, a date palm was not just a tree, it was a survival system. 5. Olives, the fruit that became a symbol of peace. When the dove returned to Noah with an olive leaf, that leaf carried more than hope. It carried evidence that life had returned to the earth. The olive tree became one of the most enduring symbols in Scripture because it represented strength, longevity, and renewal. Olives were eaten whole after curing, and they were also pressed for oil, which became central to cooking, medicine, and worship. The olive fruit and its oil contain monounsaturated fats, vitamin E, and oleocanthal, a compound studied for its anti-inflammatory effects. Some researchers have noted that oleocanthal acts in a way that resembles ibuprofen in the body. That doesn't make olives a miracle cure, but it does explain why they became so deeply valued. Traditional use involved curing the fruit in brine, pressing it for oil, and using that oil on wounds, dry skin, and in daily meals. In a region where inflammation, dryness, and poor storage were constant concerns, the olive quietly solved more problems than most modern people realize. 6. Almonds, the fruit that budded with authority. Almonds occupy a remarkable place in Scripture. Aaron's rod budded, blossomed, and produced almonds overnight, proving divine authority in a moment of rebellion. The almond tree was also used as the model for the golden lampstand in the tabernacle. That is a powerful image, and it reflects how deeply rooted the almond was in the biblical world. Technically, the almond is the seed inside the fruit of the almond tree, which is why it belongs on this list. Nutritionally, it is one of the most dense foods in the ancient diet. Almonds are rich in vitamin E, magnesium, healthy fats, and fiber. They have been studied for their role in lowering LDL cholesterol, supporting blood sugar stability, and improving satiety. Traditional use included eating them raw or roasted, grinding them into paste, or pressing them into oil for skin and healing. When Scripture uses the almond to represent awakening, authority, and divine confirmation, it is using a fruit that already carried the weight of life, nourishment, and enduring strength. 7. Sycamore figs, the humble fruit of the overlooked. Sycamore figs are easy to miss, yet Scripture gives them a quiet but meaningful place. Amos identified himself as a tender of sycamore figs, which places him in a humble working life. Later, Zacchaeus climbed a sycamore fig tree to see Jesus. That detail matters because the tree was common enough to be found along roadsides, but sturdy enough to bear a climber. The fruit was smaller and less sweet than the common fig, but still nourishing. It offered fiber, minerals, and plant compounds that supported digestion and general nourishment. Traditional use included eating the fruit fresh or dried and using the tree's sap in folk remedies. Sycamore figs remind us that some of the most sustaining gifts in Scripture were not the most glamorous. They were the foods of ordinary people, and that is exactly what made them so important. 8. Carob pods, the fruit of desperation and hidden value. The prodigal son longed to eat the pods fed to pigs, and most scholars believe those pods were carob. In the parable, the pods symbolize humiliation and desperation, yet the fruit itself is much more valuable than that image suggests. Carob grows on drought-resistant trees across the Mediterranean and has long been used as famine food, animal feed, and a reliable source of sweetness. Carob pods are naturally sweet, high in fiber, and free of caffeine. They were traditionally eaten raw, ground into flour, or reduced into syrup. Modern research has explored carob for its digestive benefits, its ability to soothe the gut, and its usefulness as a chocolate substitute for people avoiding stimulants. The fact that Scripture uses carob to represent the lowest point of hunger only makes the story more powerful. Even in the far country, God had built sustenance into the land. 9. Pistachios, the gift fit for a ruler. When Jacob sent gifts to Egypt with his sons, pistachios were among the selected items. That tells you everything you need to know about their value. These were not ordinary trail snacks. They were luxury goods, chosen carefully for a powerful official. Pistachios were rare, prized, and considered worthy of diplomacy. Nutritionally, pistachios are rich in protein, potassium, fiber, and antioxidants, such as lutein and zeaxanthin, which are associated with eye health. They have also been studied for their ability to support blood sugar control and improve heart health markers. Traditional use included eating them raw or roasted and carrying them as a valuable trade food. Their presence in Scripture shows that ancient people knew certain fruits and seeds had both practical nourishment and social worth. Some foods fed the body, others carried status. Pistachios did both. 10. Apples or possibly quince, the fruit of poetic longing. The biblical apple is a debated translation in several passages, and scholars often argue that the original fruit may have been quince or another fragrant fruit known in the region. Still, the fruit represented beauty, desire, and delight in the Song of Solomon, which is exactly how a cherished fruit would be described. The precise species matters less than the pattern. This was a fruit associated with fragrance, sweetness, and attraction. Modern apples, and similarly textured fruits like quince, are rich in fiber, vitamin C, and plant compounds such as quercetin. Their peels contain antioxidants that support overall health, and their fiber feeds the gut microbiome. Traditionally, these fruits were eaten fresh, dried, or cooked into preserves. Their value in Scripture reminds us that fruit was not only food, it was part of how ancient people described beauty itself. 11. Mulberries, the fruit hidden in the valley. Mulberries appear in Scripture through translation and botanical debate, but they were likely known in the biblical world as an important cultivated or wild fruit. Their dark color is a clue to their nutrition. Mulberries are rich in anthocyanins, vitamin C, and resveratrol-like compounds that have attracted serious scientific interest. These pigments have been studied for their effects on inflammation, blood sugar regulation, and cardiovascular health. Traditional use included eating the berries fresh, drying them, or boiling them into syrup. In ancient communities, mulberries were especially valuable because they ripened quickly and could be preserved in concentrated form. Their place in the biblical landscape reminds us that even the fruit people rarely talk about could quietly sustain whole households. 12. Apricots, the hidden treasure of the orchard. Many scholars believe some biblical references, translated as apple, may actually point to apricots or similar stone fruits. If so, that would make perfect sense. Apricots were cultivated widely across the ancient Near East and valued for their sweetness, fragrance, and long storage life when dried. Dried apricots became a portable source of fiber, potassium, and beta-carotene, the precursor to vitamin A. That nutrient profile matters. Beta-carotene supports vision, immune function, and skin health, while the fiber helps digestion. Traditional use involved eating the fruit fresh in season and drying it for later use. In dry climates, apricots were exactly the kind of fruit that made life more stable. They could be stored, carried, and relied on when fresh harvests were gone. 13. Sour grapes, the fruit of waiting and warning. Scripture mentions sour grapes in a proverb-like warning about consequences, and consequences passing from one generation to another. Sour grapes were not the same as sweet table grapes. They were picked before ripening, or came from varieties valued more for their acidity than for eating fresh. That tartness made them useful in cooking and fermentation. From a nutritional standpoint, underripe grapes still contain water, organic acids, and some polyphenols, though they are less sweet and less energy-dense than ripe grapes. Traditionally, sour grapes were used in cooking, vinegar making, and preservation. They remind us that not every fruit in Scripture is presented as a delight. Some are there to show the cost of haste, impatience, or moral blindness. 14. Cucumis, or wild melon relatives, the fruit you had to know before you ate. This is where the story takes a serious turn. In 2 Kings, a harmful wild gourd is gathered during famine and tossed into the communal pot. The men cry out that there is death in the pot. That warning reflects a very real danger in the ancient world. Some wild fruiting vines and gourds resemble edible plants, but contain toxic compounds that can cause severe illness. The lesson here is simple. Ancient people were not casually eating anything that grew on a vine. They had to know what they were gathering. Many melon and cucumber relatives are safe and nourishing, but wild cousins can be dangerous. That biblical story is one of the clearest reminders that discernment mattered just as much as hunger. In famine, the line between nourishment and poison could be painfully thin. 15. Mandrake fruit, treasured and feared. Rachel and Leah's story involving mandrakes has made this fruit famous for centuries. In the ancient world, mandrakes were believed to be tied to fertility and desire. Their yellow fruit was prized, and their roots carried a strong reputation across many cultures. But this is where caution is absolutely necessary. Mandrake contains tropane alkaloids, compounds associated with toxicity and unpredictable effects. In the wrong amount, they can cause confusion, rapid heart rate, and serious harm. Whatever reputation mandrake carried in ancient folklore, it was not a fruit to treat casually. Scripture mentions it because people believed it had power, but modern readers should understand that the plant belongs more in the category of historical curiosity and warning than in any kind of safe food practice. 16. Raisins, the portable fruit of endurance. Raisins appear throughout Scripture as part of offerings, gifts, and travel provisions. Drying grapes was one of the oldest preservation methods in the ancient world, and for good reason. It concentrated the fruit's natural sugars, minerals, and fiber into a lightweight form that lasted for months. Raisins are rich in potassium, iron, fiber, and polyphenols. They provide quick energy and can support recovery after physical labor. Traditional use was simple. Grapes were dried in the sun, bundled, stored, and carried wherever people needed lasting nourishment. Raisins were the ancient answer to portable food. They were easy to carry, easy to store, and easy to trust. 17. Caper berries, the fruit linked to fading desire. Ecclesiastes mentions the caper berry in a passage describing the decline of age. In the ancient world, capers and caper berries were associated with appetite and vitality. The plant itself produces both the familiar pickled caper buds and larger berries. Caper berries contain flavonoids such as quercetin and rutin, which have been studied for their antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects. Traditional use involved pickling the buds and berries in brine or vinegar and serving them alongside heavier meals to stimulate digestion. The biblical reference makes more sense when you realize the caper berry was not random. It was already known as a plant linked to vitality, appetite, and flavor. 18. Citron, the fruit of beauty and festival. During the Feast of Tabernacles, worshippers carried the fruit of beautiful trees. Jewish tradition has long identified this as the citron, a large citrus fruit prized more for its fragrant peel than for its flesh. This fruit has been honored for centuries in ritual practice. Citron peel contains aromatic oils, pectin, and flavonoids that have been studied for their antioxidant and digestive supportive properties. Traditional use involved candied peel, zest, and preserved rind. The citron mattered because it was beautiful, fragrant, and lasting. In a world where fragrance and appearance could carry spiritual meaning, this fruit stood apart as something fit for celebration. 19. Wild figs and fig cakes, the fruit of healing and preservation. Fig cakes were not just food. They were medicine in compact form. Dried figs could be pressed into cakes, stored, and then used both for nourishment and for topical treatment. One of the Bible's clearest healing moments involves a fig cake being applied to King Hezekiah's boil. That is not poetic language, it is an actual treatment. Figs contain fiber, natural sugars, and enzymes such as phycin, which can help break down tissue. Traditional use included applying fig paste to boils and infections, and eating the fruit for strength during recovery. This is one of those moments where scripture and modern understanding point in the same direction. The fruit was not just symbolic, it was used because it worked. 20. Dates again, the fruit that carried a nation through the desert. I want to close with dates, because they deserve to be seen not only as sweet fruit, but as one of the great survival foods of the biblical world. They fed travelers, strengthened households, and helped define the image of blessing in the Promised Land. Packed with energy, fiber, and minerals, they were the perfect food for people crossing harsh terrain. Dates could be eaten fresh, dried, or pressed into syrup. They were reliable, portable, and nourishing. In a land where water could be scarce and long journeys were common, the date palm was one of the greatest gifts a region could offer. If figs represented stability, dates represented endurance. They were the fruit that kept people moving, and that is the real pattern running through all 20 of these fruits. They were treasured not only because they tasted good, but because they served life. They nourished the weak, sustained the traveler, marked the sacred, and in some cases, healed the sick. Ancient people may not have had the language of antioxidants, polyphenols, enzymes, and micronutrients, but they knew what worked. They knew what strengthened the household. They knew what could be dried, stored, carried, and trusted. And they preserved that knowledge in Scripture so that we could still learn from it today. So the next time you see a fig, a date, a pomegranate, or a handful of grapes, remember that these were never ordinary fruits in the biblical world. They were symbols, provisions, remedies, and gifts. They were part of how God sustained his people through real hunger and real danger. And modern science keeps confirming that the ancient instincts were not accidental. They were wise. Drop a comment and tell me which fruit surprised you most.